whatever the reason for the tariffs has been, up until the early 20th century, these were all decided by Congress. You know why, Bob?
Oh, I don't know. Tell me, Ben.
Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution makes very clear that tariff authority rests in Congress. This is a part of our
Right.
division of power.
Wait, I'm confused. If Article 1, Section 8 says that tariff authority rests in Congress, what it seems like the tariff authority is coming from on high. In the Article 2 area,
Yes, yes,
the president's, the executive branch.
yes, it is. And let me tell you this story right
Hmm.
here, because I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of details to it, but I just in general I'll tell you this. Even though there were protectionist elements of the tariffs in the United States for most of its history until the beginning of the 20th century, federal revenue came from tariffs and the sale of Western lands. Those are two major sources throughout that era. And because this was incredibly important for the economy, and it was a source of revenue, and Americans historically have been very suspicious of handing power over to tax, it was made clear no one person should get to decide what the tariffs were going to be, because that would give them essentially the ability to run ramshot over everyone and decide what the tariffs were going to be, which could extort people, right, which could increase revenues, and which could, of course, because of the power of a national tariff to disproportionately affect certain groups, that would give a president, one person, too much authority. You get a Virginian in there and they want to raise money, well, maybe they're just going to ramp up tariffs on manufactured goods and things like this. So it was just kind of this general suspicion of giving one person too much power that was in the founding generation and is clear in the Constitution. But you got to consider what Article 2 does give is it gives the president the power over diplomacy, right? The president takes the lead in diplomacy. And what ends up happening in the 20th century is that once the 16th Amendment is ratified, which allows 16th taxes, that's how I always tell my students to remember it, it gives a federal income tax. The revenue raising aspect of the federal government shifts to income tax, which means that no longer are tariffs an important part of federal revenue raising. Well, when this happens, what tariffs become essentially is a tool of diplomacy. So you have 1917, right, which is the Trading with the Enemies Act, which allows the president to respond in times of war. You then have the expansion of the executive over tariffs in 1974 with the Trade Act of 1974, which gives the United States Trade Representative the right to impose tariffs if a proper investigation is done and unfair policies are found. Then in 1977, you have expanded executive power. But in all of these cases, it generally has to deal with short-term issues that will be resolved through diplomacy. In that sense, Congress begins to cede authority to the president because this becomes more of a diplomatic issue. And that is where we have been for a very long time. Tariffs represent a very small percentage of our revenue, and they have not for a long time been seen as a potential source of federal revenue until now.
Right. And I got to say, Ben, getting back to Bolt and these early tariffs, he argues that when you were elected to Congress in that period between 1820 and the Civil War, you were 1816 in the Civil War, you were sent there to either vote for or against the tariff. That is what your constituents sent you to. It was the most animating issue in American politics in America. And it was the issue, the anger for and against was driven by the people. It was driven by the democracy. And the earliest political conventions were not for Democrats or Whigs or Federalists. The earliest political conventions were groups that got together for or against the tariff. And the
Right.
political parties, as they developed, took these attributes and likenesses of these tariff conventions on on for themselves. So the tariff was the issue before the Civil War. And Bolt argues it helped to form and spread our democracy. It was the issue that animated the democracy in America at that point. Because they would say that you read these debates from Congress, right? And politician after politician would get up and say, the American people will never, we will never agree to direct taxation. We need the tariff to fund the government. So just so I want people to realize like how important this idea of tariffs to fund the government were at that point before the Civil War in this country.
And the thing with what's going on now is to remember, yes, that was before, and a lot of people go, well, I used to argue about the tariff. Isn't that a weird thing? They argued about the tariff because to them, at the federal level, the tariff was the thing that was going to cost them the most money. It was the thing that was going to affect diplomacy. And it was a central issue to, if you think about the limited interaction that Americans had with the federal government, this was central to how much they were going to pay, how much power the federal government was going to have, what their diplomacy was going to be. In a sense, it was at that time the focus that we have now over our own income taxes and business taxes and things like this, which is why I would contend that whatever the justification for ceding tariff power to the president was in the 20th century, if we are now returning to a period where the sitting president has proposed a external revenue service, has proposed the idea that tariffs could replace the income tax as the source of revenue for the federal government. Now that statistically seems quite preposterous given where we are now, given that you would have to like put 100, I think I read one place it would be like 100% tariff on everything to even come close to matching what we had now in terms of revenue. But regardless of that, you should remember that one person getting to decide this, that person's preferences are going to be everything. And as
Right. He can pick winners and losers.
he can pick winners and losers without the voices of everyone across the country.
That means that if he is the kind of person who gets vindictive or likes revenge or likes to be groveled to or likes to be kissed up to, that gives him a lot of power to enrich himself and his friends.
Or someone who goes angrily when in response to a threat of tariffs from Europe and says there'll be a 200% tariff on imported goods, and you're sitting in a state like Tennessee, home of Jack Daniel's distillery, or I guarantee you the representative from around, from the production facilities of Jack Daniel's would have something to say and would fight like hell in Congress to make sure that these types of tariffs didn't disproportionately and kind of whimsically just get slapped upon the people of their district. But now, if it's one person, those voices don't get heard.
No, no.
And so I would contend, and I mentioned this last week. Rand Paul introduced the No Taxation Without Representation Act. He's a libertarian, but he understands what this is. This is a tax. It's a tax on the people. You will pay it. The importer who brings them in pays the tariff, and that's going to be passed on to you. So just remember that this is a tax. It is not possible for one person to factor in all the costs and benefits. That's why there's Congress. That's why there's a House of Representatives that can hear the voices of everywhere. On top of that, if you are looking to outlay, if we're talking about creating American jobs, if you are talking about laying out massive amounts of capital to develop American manufacturing, you're probably not going, if the tariffs are what's going to make your production feasible, it's highly unlikely you're going to outlay large amounts of fixed capital to create jobs when you're not sure if one person's going to up and change their mind overnight. What Congress does is it means that it takes agreement, disagreement, debate, and then you can have something more long term. So this is what I'm laying out here as a general argument about why you should be concerned. And this isn't just about Trump. These tariff powers were expanded under Trump's first term. And I'll tell you, the Democrats were in control and could have reined them in and chose not to, because power consolidated rarely goes away on its own. We should demand that our congressmen, I don't care who you are, you should demand that your congressmen take back their proper constitutional authority, because it's for the best of all of us. And doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. This is just general principles.